All right. All right. So, welcome to the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast. It's been quite a while, but I have a special guest, Levi Shinyo Walbert. Hope I got that correct.
Yeah,
uh,
sounded good to me.
oh, great, great. So, he is a Fortean researcher interested in the paranormal, esotericism, Buddhism. And so, I figured I'd have him on the podcast. And this will probably be a unique one because we plan to talk about a pretty diverse range of topics like ufology, Buddhism, occultism, and sort of the intersection of these three topics. So, can you introduce yourself and how you got interested initially into esotericism, Buddhism, etc.?
Sure thing. Like you said, my name is Levi Shinyo Walbert. Shinyo is my Buddhist Dharma name. I'm a minister with the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism, which established off of the legacy of our founder, Gyomei Kobose, who he was a Jodo Shinshu priest. But he had this dream of seeing a kind of American Buddhism, a general Mahayana, which could take root in America, one could say. And we've been kind of with that program ever since. Let's see here. So that's my Buddhist side. I had studied philosophy for my undergraduate work and theology for my master's. And that's partly where I would say it's the more esoteric occult side of some of my research came into being. Like I said, I call myself a Fortean researcher because the nice part about that is that, there's really no official, there's no card to get. There's no degree to get with that. It's just a descriptor of the kind of things I'm interested in. And, I've taken some of the research in that academic style as I had done with, regular theology. For those who don't really know what Fortean is, I think I was explaining before. It's a fancy, a nice little elitism way of saying paranormal research that doesn't imply just ghost hunting, which unfortunately, if you Google things now, that tends to be pretty much synonymous. But for those in the know, it's really the way I've described it as studying anomalous phenomena. And it comes off of the name of Charles Fort, who was one of the first people to kind of systematically do that. The nice part also being not necessarily always looking for answers, but just documenting the weird things that happen in the world.
Okay, for sure. Sounds very interesting. I know you have a big interest in UFOs and ufology, and right now, obviously, obviously in the media cycles, it's like a hot topic, right? Like you have,
Oh yeah,
um, I forget the guy's name, but is it General Frazier or Colonel Frazier or something like that? I think it's Colonel Frazier. Yeah,
there's
you have
so many names now.
yeah, there's so many names now, it's hard to even say, but it really started like from during when the pandemic was happening, there was like, the Pentagon admits that, they have UFOs or, videos and evidence of UFOs. And then now you have like people coming out and saying that they've seen these things and they've seen even accounts of like alien bodies and even
Yeah,
like
the nice little
Mexico and yeah. Mhm.
the nice little paper mache aliens we have down in Mexico.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are those. Oh,
Yeah.
there's a lot of fun stuff in it.
Right, right, right. So yeah, maybe we can discuss a little bit about esoteric, kind of the intersection between those two topics of like Western occultism, esotericism, and then ufology in general. For me, I'm very, very interested in these topics. However, I do always have skepticism when it's like the U.S. government or any sort of government releasing this kind of stuff because I'm just inherently skeptical of the government in general. And it's always like, what's the agenda here? What's the, you know, like
Yeah,
why now? And what's, what's the redirect or what have you?
not to immediately start complaining, but
Yeah.
it's one of those things that really drives me wild. I had to leave a lot of the subreddits and forums and all these things because of people sitting there going disclosure, disclosure, it's happening, and I'm shaking my head going it's not happening. This is if you study the history of ufology, this is pretty common in the terms of this kind of bait and switch.
Hmm.
It's just wild seeing the same people who in one breath will sit there and say, the government's lying. They're trying to what are they, they're trying to dissuade people, they're trying to do government misinformation acts, and at the same time they're going, well, we can trust these guys, they're from the government. And I'm
Right.
kind of going, I'm not saying that it's all smoke and mirror, but I am saying
Sure.
that, yeah, there's a group to be skeptical of making, these strange claims. The government's a little bit high on the list, if you wouldn't think.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, yeah, it's, I mean, that's definitely a whole topic in itself, right? But
Oh, of course.
yeah, that's a whole topic in itself. But in terms of like occultism and the intersection of these two topics, how do you see them being? Uh, how do you see them playing off each other, or having? Do you see them having any sort of relation? Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, this might go a little far, and I think I'm okay with taking this extreme, saying I really don't think that there is overall that hard of a line between the occult and the UFO phenomena.
Mhm.
And that's a little, it's a cagey thing to say, and you've got to be careful with it because unfortunately there is this magnetism to pull to one side of the extreme really quickly to go, oh, all of the UFOs, they're the classy one, they're the gods of the old world, they're angels, they're demons, they're this and that. And there's this easy way of saying either UFOs and the beings related to them
Mhm.
are just the things in occultism that have been documented for however long documentation's been going on. Or they do the inverse of going, well, actually, all the weird things in occultism and religion, those were just aliens and technology all along. And I think
Right,
both of
right,
those
for sure.
responses,
I've heard both arguments. Yeah.
they miss the mark entirely. And I think
Mhm.
that's the hard part of talking about this subject is that it's almost a new subject altogether. I think I follow very much in the thought of Alan Greenfield, if that's a familiar name, who was both an occultist and a ufologist. I think he calls himself a para-ufologist. But
Mm.
he was really one of the first to kind of make that argument to say, hey, the UFO phenomenon, this occult stuff, they're kind of one and the same. I mean, the same way you summon some spirit tends to work in UFOs too. Um,
Interesting.
his kind of big work is the secret cipher of the Ufonauts, and
Mhm.
that's where you get into the whole occultist movement there, connection, if you will. Especially Crowley, he's kind of at the center of it, as he always tends to be.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, you have things like what was the entity like Lam, I think is the name, right?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
like
It's
an
very
alien.
interesting. And again, people do that thing where Google the picture of Lam, Lam,
Mhm.
and people go, "Oh, it's a gray alien." Well, it's not, especially because that image predates the kind of archetypal gray, image that you see in Hollywood everywhere. It's on the Whitley Strieber's cover, that classic one. I mean, they're so similar, and there is something to it, but again, you get to that real extreme of just, oh, it's that, you know.
Yeah, it's easy to just correlate one or the other, but it's not really saying there is or not saying there isn't, right? There could be some sort of correlation. So, for example, in your view, do you view this phenomenon, are these, like extra dimensional beings, or are they, some sort of multi-dimensional entities, or are they just other sentient beings with more advanced technology? How do you personally view uh,
Well, I
UFO
guess that I
alien
take both
phenomena?
I take both the safe route and the coward's route out of saying, well, I don't really believe any. I just have my suspicions.
Sure, sure.
So if I had to, throw a dart in there, I think John Keel especially used the term ultra terrestrial, which I think is a very good way of looking at it. That they
Hmm.
come from somewhere else, not necessarily from outside of Earth, but beside it. He used the super spectrum of things.
Mm.
And I tend to follow that idea. I think that it's very interesting that we have very archetypal um, views of these creatures. That they tend to appear to us differently as time goes on.
Hmm.
And I think that's an important factor to it, especially kind of maybe jumping to the some of the Buddhist notions of it. That Buddhists I find that very easy to understand. It says, okay, our perceptions of the world, is illusionary. They're not
Sure.
exactly how the world is, but they appear that way to us at this time. And that's going a little bit into Robert Anton Wilson and maybe logic, which is cycling all the way back to one of the first questions, probably where I started in the idea of esotericism and occultism is
Mhm.
through Robert Anton Wilson, and he's really been a sticking force with all of this stuff.
Mm. Sort of the high strangeness, weirdness, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I
Mhm.
think going back, and I keep saying going back because we're going to go all around. The
Yeah.
idea, I think, the easiest way to describe them is that through all of these things within occultism, religion, ufology, or is this contact with some kind of higher or different intelligence? I think
Hmm.
Crowley said preter-human intelligence is how he described AWAS and LAM. These
Absolutely.
things
Yeah.
that are similar but not.
Hmm. Mm,
Uh,
similar but not interesting. Okay. Okay. So you view them personally as use what's the term that you used? Ultra
uh, I,
terrestrial, right?
yeah,
But
ultra terrestrial instead of extra.
right,
I'm
right,
not
right. Hmm.
I'm not keen on the idea that they're little, biological, creatures that evolved in the same way we did on a planet, and then they just got really smart, and now for some reason they're beaming over here to harass farmers and people. That just it's a great myth and it's a wonderful sci-fi thing, but as the classic saying goes, reality is stranger than fiction.
Okay. What do you see the distinction between like a praetor? I don't know how to exactly pronounce that, but praetor intelligence, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know how to pronounce exactly either. I'm kind of hoping that that's right. It's one of those words you only see in writing often.
right, right, right. Well, what's the distinction you see? Do you see those as more like non-corporal entities, or do you see them as, you know, being corporal entities as well?
That's kind of the difficult part with some of these. They certainly seem to be both in certain regards. And there are some people who have whole classifications of, well, there's this type and there's that type.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as confident to sit there and say that outside of the mythology and history of ufology, but it seems that there are some which are, maybe I can say, incarnate, some which are disincarnate,
Mm-hmm.
uh, maybe some who can choose to be either. And it's a very interesting topic as you really dive into it, because even Whitley Strieber, who is one of the most famous UFO contactees or abductees, he's the one who wrote Communion, really where we get that very, very visceral story about being abducted. Even in later years, he said that he's not wholly sure he ever left his cabin, or you question whether it was a mental thing. It was a real experience, but there's this question of the physicality of it all. Somehow it seems
Mm-hmm.
almost both, because people who may never leave their houses, or of these kind of stories and accounts you get, they
Mm-hmm.
still end up with marks on their body.
Right.
There's always this kind of play between that physical and non-physical experience, which is very, very interesting. And again, it's frustrating because it doesn't fit into our normal perceptions. It would be easier if they were little gray men or spirits wholly, but the accounts tend to point to something kind of in between if you believe them.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure. That's sort of my view on the matter as well, right? It's like I don't know. I don't think it necessarily needs to be one or the other, right? I mean, I think that there's probably wide variety, a big spectrum, a wide spectrum of these sort of phenomena, right? And
Oh yeah.
and in terms of like Western occultism, I mean, in my own personal experience, I worked with Western occultism for many years, And there are certain entities and phenomena that definitely feel like extra dimensional, otherworldly, right? Like, so for example, most people report, like when I worked with Enochian entities, for example, right?
Oh yeah.
Angels. It's like, so there's a big, a big difference between working with like planetary angels that feel sort of just more like light energy, fractal, almost non-entity like, really, versus like the Enochian angels, which feel like these, almost like aliens or something like that. That's how a lot of people describe it, right? So certainly, even within the world of like greater intelligences or entities, there's a wide variety, right? It's a spectrum.
Oh,
Right?
yeah, without a doubt. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with just describing again, yeah, these things, especially in very in ceremonial magic and Enochian magic in particular, they are alien. I'm not saying they are aliens in our classic idea, but they are alien in description. There's something very there's a reality to them to some level when you experience it. Now, I say that as someone who, of course, reads reports, and I don't mess with Enochian magic myself because I think I forget who said it. It was a podcast at one point, some random one who said, "Look, it's actually safer to do some of the demonic, Goetian stuff because it says, they kind of know how to deal with humans. Angels are scary because they don't know how to do it. They assume everything is in that kind of mythical talk. Everything is God, therefore I don't have to hold back."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah, and there seem to be like entities that have their own agenda versus like ones that are just sort of like more like something sort of like something you can tap into that's already like part of the fractal universe or whatever you want to have, you right, like qualities per se, tapping into this quality, tapping into that quality of energy versus something that's like has its own agenda, complete agenda, right, and maybe wants you to follow that agenda. So
Oh yeah.
yeah. So I find that quite fascinating as well. I remember you also talking about like there's like Jack Parsons and the Babylon workings, right? So,
Oh yeah.
what are your views on that? And like, is that related to this phenomena as well? Did
Oh,
you
I mean,
again stuff?
I I would think that it seems interesting in terms of coincidence,
Mm-hmm.
especially considering you have Parsons there, and of course Hubbard there,
Mm-hmm.
the two kind of main perpetrators of the Babylon workings. This kind of ritual they attempted to bring a physical moonchild, this bring Babylon into existence as a physical entity, as a child, and of course they did that in the desert, in this massive ritual, and it depends on exactly what you want to look at it, but either it's a failure, maybe a purposeful failure.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting notion is that the area they did it in, not long after, you see one of the biggest UFO flaps in history. And of course, one of the most famous, the crash in Roswell, not far away from it, both in terms of time and location.
Mm-hmm.
So in one sense, there's a mythology, and I use the word mythology not in the same way of a fairy tale, but just this kind of story that we need to use to describe these things. So I don't mean that as a pejorative term at all. I actually think I use it very regularly because it's the only way I understand the world is through these kinds of myths. But in this mythology, it says, yeah, the Babylon workings might have purposely or unpurposely torn something open and let some things in. You get
Mm-hmm.
this a lot of weird UFO and strange things in the sky, all kind of centering around that area.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, isn't it? It's interesting. And it's also interesting if you look at like Parsons is responsible for like the innovation of like jet fuel and going to outer space, and so that even adds another, you know,
Yeah. And then
element.
Hubbard, I mean,
And
his whole
Hubbard,
thing is aliens, space.
right, right.
I mean, he
Scientology and the
he was this
alien. I forget the name of the
Xenu and
yeah, right. Exactly. So it all ties together in a very interesting way, right?
Yeah, and really, this Hubbard was a scary person. People, we laugh at him a lot because, oh, he's the idea is, oh, he's a con man or something. He wrote science fiction, and that's kind of, we almost infantilize him as
Mhm.
this kind of just tricky guy. But I mean, in terms of occults, and he was by far an occultist, and one who, I don't really use the term evil to describe people, but I mean, a
Mhm.
lot of his idea was thelema on its head. It says, "Don't follow your true will, follow my true will." And
Right.
unfortunately, he succeeded to a certain degree. And so again, it all factors in together.
Oh yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Um, okay, how about to kind of like bring it to the early part of the conversation? Now that this, there's all these UFO disclosures and what have you. What do you see that related to this Western esotericism, or is this sort of like, do you see that as like, is it like a psyop, or is it somewhere in between? What do you think
Well, I
first?
mean, I think the big thing is, first off, I don't think that the government actually knows as much as they would like people to think they know about the phenomena.
Hmm.
Um, there's this pervasive idea that they know what's going on, and I actually think that would be, not knowing would be the scariest thing, for the government to come out and say that we don't know what's happening. So it's easier to kind of make this, I think if the psyop exists, it's about, we know what's going on, but we need to hide it from the public for safety or this or that. I
Sure.
think it's a more terrifying option for them that they don't. They
Mhm.
certainly know something. They know more than they let on. But I think any dream that we're going to get disclosure is a false hope, because that would also imply that they're going
Mhm.
to tell us what it is, and that implies they know what it is.
Okay, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. But do you have any kind of confidence that they have? I mean, it's they probably have some sort of information or some sort of, or maybe perhaps they have some sort of technology or some sort of, like recent. Okay, for example, like they have some sort of video evidence of, indescribable things. Do you think that, as you said, probably they're not confident exactly what this is, but also at the same time, you have people coming out saying that they've seen these things, right? Like for example, what's your take on like the Bob Lazar story?
Oh man, Bob Lazar is an interesting one, because it's equally unbelievable, but there's too much things that do add up. He's come back time and time with a degree of evidence to his claims, but again, you know, there's some things that don't add up. Which, I mean, that's a terrible sentence to say. Oh, that's a classic way of saying I agree with some things and I disagree with other things. But I think my kind of opinion on Lazar is that I think he believes what he says, but I'm not sure if he was set up to. He was
Sure.
rushed through these facilities really, really quickly, and he only got a glimpse into something. Were they testing some psyops on him for the public? I mean, kind of very classic story about that is that when they were testing some of these stealth planes, I think it was one of the first ones, a plane without a propeller, which
Uh-huh.
was crazy at the time to think about.
Mhm.
It was actually, I think it was Area 51 or somewhere out in that area. And what they would do is, they'd have to fly it around, and there were other pilots, and they couldn't really tell them just to stop flying that day because that'd draw too much suspicion. So what did they do? Well, the simplest thing, they threw a monkey mask on the pilot, a really realistic one, and they flew it around. So the guys who saw it, the pilots in the sky, they're not going to go to the bar and their friends and go, "Guys, I saw this crazy new plane. It had no propeller, and also a chimp was flying it."
Yeah, right.
People,
Yeah, exactly. Just to make it yeah, exactly, exactly.
so
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
people
Um
think that psyops have to be that clever, but they really don't. It's you can tune enough smoke and mirrors, and again, I don't really know enough about Bob Lazar. I've watched a bunch and I've read a bunch and yada yada, but it's one of those things that's interesting. I could see it both ways. But yeah.
what do you think are the most credible claims? Like, so you have like the claims of Bob Lazar, you have the claims of the recent UFO whistleblowers and what have you. have there been any that have been like convincing to you, or have you viewed all of these as sort of like highly suspicious? Uh,
It's it, it's a very hard thing, and I think I take the same idea of one of my favorite theologians was is Hartshorne, Charles Hartshorne, who's a process theologian, and not he's talking about the idea of God, and he says, "Look, I found no argument that is convincing on its own. It's only cumulative arguments that have convinced me." And I take a little bit of the same idea with this stuff. Where I don't know if there's one case that is the showstopper that says this is it. This claim is the most credible. It's that you these things over and over again. The accounts and the abductees and contactees and witnesses, the amount of them over time, and it tends to be people who have a lot at stake. I know that the what do you call it? The stereotype is the backwoods redneck who done UFO picked up uh, my cow and Bigfoot came off and ran off with my wife, but that's really
right.
not who's seeing them. I mean, one of the most famous cases is, Betty and Barney Hill, and people forget that they had an incredible amount to lose. They were back then a very, very prominent civil rights activists, interracial couple at the time of the civil rights movement. I mean, they're the kind of people who had a lot to lose to come forward and still did because of how shattering the uh, encounter was.
Right.
So I think there are a lot of fakes, trust me, and I think a lot of misidentifications, but there's too many accounts for me to say it's all misidentification and hallucination.
Sure. 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 Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. Definitely. It's just sort of hard to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, right? With so much, um, just so much out there, right? And especially these days with, almost the nonstop bombardment in the media, right?
yeah,
So,
and I'll make a quick comment on the recent, the quote unquote disclosure whistleblower cases. I found them very boring. There was really
uh,
nothing more than just claims.
oh, hello? Can you hear me?
Hello, hello.
Oh, yeah, you cut out for about 10 seconds. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, no worry. I'll restart with that. So where
Okay.
was I?
So
So these,
nothing more than claims. Yeah.
yeah, and that's fine. It's an important step. I mean, in the history of actually getting someone, on record there officially in front of the Congress to whoever they talk to, that's all well and good. But if you study ufology or the history of it, it's nothing new. Oh my God, non-human intelligences. Yeah, we've since the 50s and 60s, this kind of stuff has been around. Here's my kind of take on the whole thing of the recent interest in mass media.
Mhm.
We have how do I put it? I think first off, the cat's too big to keep in the bag. People know UFOs exist. Now, even the most ardent skeptic will say they exist. They'll just say they're misidentifications. In the most real, it's unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs now, and
Right.
that's fine. But it's one thing to say they exist and we're investigating, and I think that's where we can't deny them anymore, especially in the age of the smartphone and everyone has a phone in their pocket and people are taking videos constantly, pictures constantly. So the government does have to come out and at least acknowledge they exist. And then I think that if there is a conspiracy or a psyop, it's this kind of very soft disclosure. So let's take some of the people who testified. I
Sure.
don't I don't want to say that they're lying because I don't think they have any reason to. At the same time, do I believe it's possible that other people said, all right, let's test the waters, we'll feed these guys some information and let them go public with it? I think that's pretty reasonable to have some suspicions on. Um, even if those were lies to them, I think that they probably believe it. And I think they're being honest about what they were told. But again, it's big claims also require pretty big evidence.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's sort of like I don't know, the power structures don't give up their power, so easily like that, right? Like it's not like,
Right.
if this was threatening to their power, they wouldn't, they'd find a way to shut it down, so to speak. As we
Yeah.
find out, throughout history, it's not like they would encourage it and spread it in the media and things along those lines, right? Like it would
Yeah.
be you would be considered, you know, they'd start trying to cancel these people or say they're rapists or racist or whatever,
Oh,
whatever it is to get them to shut up, because it's a threat to their power,
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, there's threat to political power. People end up jumping, quote unquote, jumping out of, 10th-story windows and suicides with
Right?
bullets to the back of their head. When it comes to just earthly political power, that's commonplace. But suddenly, the biggest secret of all time, if it was real, about there are other intelligences, things are real, well, that's okay. They can get away with that. That's also what kind of irks me.
Yeah.
At the same time, if there are people trying to expose it, they probably would be dead and we wouldn't know about them. So if they're doing their, a good job at keeping it silent, then they're doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And I wouldn't know.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I definitely agree with that. What was I gonna say? Yeah, I think that I was initially asking you, like, what do you see as like the most credible claims, if any of them do you consider, were there any claims that you really thought like, wow, that's I don't know, what would you say, believable or interesting or seems, different than the other ones? Because like recently it's really been mostly just claims, right? Like, or maybe perhaps evidence. Have you seen, like, is there like videos you've seen or um, things along those lines that were kind of persuasive to you?
I mean, really though, some of the videos released by the government, even about the Tic Tacs, making these insane aerial movements. I mean, I think that's actually fairly significant that you have it through official channels now.
Hmm.
And of course, the problem with government videos is anyone, if they want to, can say psyop, alter, yada yada. But I mean, these are things that other people have documented, especially the Tic Tacs, these radical movements that defy most physics we understand, with crafts, if you want to call them that, or objects, which, no oh my goodness, propulsion, no external anything. That's pretty spooky if you think about it. Um, Other than that, I mean, I've not seen a video of an alien
Yeah.
that ever has been reported. There's always a million ones that are really wonderful hoaxes or CGI projects that were never intended to be a hoax, but just got disseminated through the grapevine. There was a really, silly one about like the I think it was the Vegas alien that was just kind of a blur, or maybe it was a propane tank. I think they ended up looking it up, but oh my goodness. And then recently there was this the one that I thought was funny was that everyone was really losing their minds about this supposed footage of an airliner being abducted by three UFOs into a portal.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and people were really going crazy, going, guys, you couldn't do this, you couldn't fake this, and really wonderful thought and a lot of analysis. And then one person, the one guy goes, actually, I recognized that portal animation from a video game from the 90s, and they found the exact one, and of course it was a fake. But again, I really feel like the stories are the things that get me very interested.
Mm.
Again, the Betty and Barney Hill one was very interesting. She had residue on the dress that still is unidentifiable.
Mhm.
Um, there are just some of these things that are so strange that if it was fake to a certain degree, you would think that they would be better written. I guess is that the easiest way of putting it. There's some things are so weird that they're
Mhm.
coming out with that nobody does believe except for us weird people with our tinfoil hats. But that
Yeah.
almost gives me more credibility to a certain level.
Right, right, right. Um, there's always been that argument too. It's like we recovered some sort of alien technology, and we study, some the governments, the secret government sort of like studies this technology. That's why we've been like, we go from riding stagecoaches to like, going to outer space and like, yeah, 70 years,
Right.
something like that, and like internet and all this crazy technology that just sped up. Like, how did technology, how did our advances in that regard speed up, so exponentially quick within such a short period of time, right? There's always been that argument that, it's due to recovered alien technology or some sort of contact or things along these lines, right?
Yeah, and that's one of those ones where I think when you first get into ufology, it feels very convincing,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. I think the answer really is just humans are smart. And once we get compiled technology and ways of disseminating that technology and sharing it and critiquing it, massive innovation happens. It's the same critique I always have of the ancient astronaut theory, where no matter what, humans can't just be clever and cool and smart. It's we know how the pyramids were built. We know how the Nazca lines could happen. We know how to use ladders and winches and pulleys. And yeah, you have to throw a huge amount of man labor at something that can do amazing things. I don't think you need aliens. I mean, if it was proven the pyramids were built from the top down, maybe I'd give the idea some credence, but they were built from the bottom up.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
I think, if anything, I kind of like more the notion of uh, human progress in terms of spirituality and of psychology and kind of the human spirit or zeitgeist being influenced by these higher intelligences. That one I find more credible because we
Sure,
also are kind of
sure.
really dumb in terms of just always trying to kill each other.
Right, right, right. I mean, that's sort of like most religions are, they're sort of founded in that regard, right? It's like, they, for example, a prophet hears the voice of God, or for example, in Islam, you have what is it? Angel Gabriel appears
Mhm.
to Muhammad, right, and reveals the speech of God, the Quran, right? And it's this contact with this, this entity, right? And then, other religions too, even in, Buddhism, you have, in Vajrayana deities or Buddhas appearing to, you know, different people and transmitting these teachings, right? And so,
Yeah,
and pretty much, every tradition has something along these lines, right? These sort of revelations by whether they're called angels or whether they're called Buddhas or what have you, right? This is huge in like every single religion, pretty much, right? And
yeah,
of course, not even mainstream religion, but also like small esoteric, Western esoteric, what would you say? Western esoteric traditions, basically any sort of spiritual tradition has this phenomenon, right? And then also you have the alien phenomenon, uh, and so it is very easy to see like a parallel, right? Like there are we're talking about some sort of extra dimensional entities or angels or bodhisattvas or buddhas that are here to in all these traditions, at least a lot of times they're portrayed here to further or advance spiritual progress of humanity, right?
yeah, and especially in the esoteric case. I mean, you see this very common notion of I think Blavatsky would have called them, the secret chiefs or the
Mm-hmm.
ascended masters, or I mean, they really function as bodhisattvas too, beings who have trying to help guide humanity or people to enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of even the alien lore or UFO, and there's the idea of these beings from another planet, they want to help us, and there are some who don't want to help us, and there's this kind of mythic battle that always goes on between those two forces of wanting to progress humanity or to slow it down in terms of spiritual development.
Right, right, right. Exactly, exactly. And yeah, I mean, maybe we can also bring this around to like Buddhism. So you had mentioned earlier that you are an ordained minister. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, okay.
Minister. We use the term especially within kind of going off of that tradition of Jodo Shinshu, which is where our um, my group kind of has its spiritual roots. And of course, disclaimer to all this UFO and occult, that's all my that's the 14 side. I don't want to represent the organization or my myself as saying, oh, this is what we do. I think I'm kind of the weird one out and liking all of this.
Right, right, right. It's your own personal interest and your own passions and what have you. But yeah, I would say also like, although in Buddhism, like I was saying earlier, you have there are these whatever you want to call them, right? Buddhas or dakinis or revelatory beings that come and reveal these teachings or cycles or practices and scriptures and tantras and what have you, right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
yeah, so how do you maybe you can talk a little bit about like, and even there's like there's even sutras and there's even whole cycles of teaching that claim to be almost alien too, right? Like even like the Dzogchen teachings claim that they're taught in 13 different universes or something like that. Or you have claims on like the Lotus Sutra, I think you're talking about like alien worlds or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's Buddhism is very fascinating in terms of this discussion of extraterrestrial, ultra terrestrial, UFO, because as a tradition, most Buddhists just in general wouldn't bat an eye at the idea that there is life beyond this earth.
Right.
Yeah, of course there is. No, of that's not a crazy thing, or that life or sentience interacts with us. That's
Mhm.
very classic in almost every tradition.
Mhm.
It's kind of taken for granted, and Buddhism always had a cosmology that fit this very well. It says yes, there are other world systems, whether you want to think of that in terms of galaxies or parallel worlds or something else. As the Buddha talked about these very directly.
Mhm.
Now, of course, I always take that a grain of salt of saying, oh, it's in a way that we humans can understand and
Mhm.
interpret, which tends not to be truth as it is, but truth filtered through illusion and ignorance. But it's
Right.
useful. It's what we need to have before we get to that true awareness. So yeah,
Mhm.
Buddhism, I think, is such an interesting tradition, is that it really has the most, in my opinion, as a Buddhist, with a little bit of bias,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
has the most potential for being one to be very accepting of these things. Um,
Right. Mhm.
it
Yeah,
makes room for them.
it makes room for them. Yeah, exactly. And not only does it make room for them, I mean, it mentions them. Um, it mentions them in various places, right?
Yeah, pretty explicitly in some regards. I mean, again, I caution anyone to this idea of these mentions in ancient texts are going, oh, they're aliens, or aliens
Sure.
are just the gods. But again, there's some interesting parallel. Like I said, the Lotus Sutra in I believe, the 23rd chapter. The Buddha's about to preach an amazing sutra that's very rare, and another Buddha, another world system, catches on and says to a student, "Hey, you better go down to Earth, go to this realm, because there's going to be a sutra taught that's very rare." And there's this really weird detail about it where this Buddha says, but the people on that world system, they're really small and ugly, so don't offend them. And it's the little things like that. Says, okay, they look different. And then the student, who has an incomprehensible name to my English mouth,
Mhm.
um, goes, and he first psychically goes.
Mhm.
And then, they said, oh, you should actually come here. And then he goes and he comes down in what's described as a flying tower, which makes
Mm.
this incredible noise as it lands, and he comes out and the Buddha talks to him and he can shapeshift. And,
Mhm.
and then he listens to the Buddha, says thank you, and then climbs back in his giant tower and flies back off. And
Right, right. Yeah.
and of course, again, anyone who's versed in the Lotus Sutra understands there's so much symbolism and hidden meaning packed in, that it is a simplistic view, but again, it's an interesting one, and having that parallel with the modern ufological mythology. So again, but again, it's not even an interesting chapter in the Lotus Sutra compared to some of the other ones. It's just accepted as is.
Hmm. Yeah, quite interesting, right? Yeah, it's not. I like what you said. Like, it's not like for a Buddhist to say to tell a Buddhist person like they're aliens or other worlds or other entities. It's just like, yeah, of course, right? It's kind of like it's not. It doesn't take much convincing, right? You know.
Yeah, it's kind of taken for granted that that's fine. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
think it's kind of a good thing because the Buddhist answer tends to be that's great, but how is it going to help you escape samsara, its suffering and dissatisfaction? And I think it's a valid criticism and why the Buddha didn't talk about it at length because it's all right, that's great and all, but um, so what?
Right. Exactly. And obviously having the Buddhist view that all beings are sort of interconnected, and there's not beings that are separate of, they all lack inherent existence. In other words, they're, dependent origination. It's not like there's a being that's separate from you, that's separate from everything else, right?
And
So
that tends to be
mhm,
that tends to be an interesting experience you have for people who have positive
mhm,
contact experiences about this kind of ego death and
mhm,
awareness of unity. Of course, for those who have a very bad experience, it tends to be the opposite. But again, not
mhm.
all higher intelligences are good. Even in the Buddhist tradition, there are many of beings that are not so happy with each other.
Right. Yeah, for sure. You have the warring sort of like the devas or the asuras. Yeah, the asuras that are like always at war with each other and jealous and spiteful, right? And they're,
Yeah,
yeah.
those who tend to align themselves with Mara rather than the Buddhas.
Right. Absolutely. So you've
It,
studied a lot, you studied theology, philosophy, Western esotericism, paranormal activity. What specifically drew you to Buddhism, and then also to your specific tradition? Maybe you can talk a little bit about your specific tradition as well.
sure, of course. Let's see. I mean, my story of encountering Buddhism is it's not terribly exciting.
Mhm.
Excuse me there. But I was in a school, a very strange school, who were we did art. So I had a major in high school. So
Right.
art major, and we had to do we did college level art history as a requirement. And
Mhm.
so the nice part is every time we moved into a new culture of art history, we would try to understand especially the religion because a lot of ancient art tends to be religious focused.
Mhm.
And I think around 14, my class had were shown the PBS documentary, The Buddha, which
Mhm.
is still a very good documentary. It was just very simple, but quite beautifully presented story of Siddhartha Gautama Shakyamuni Buddha's life. It went over the core concepts, and it really spoke to me. Something about it stuck with me very heavily, and I think partly that was because I was going through a kind of uh, uh, deconversion, lack of faith in terms of Christianity, to which I was kind of self-initiated into.
Mhm.
Neither of my parents were religious.
Mhm.
My family, everyone was Christian, but only in a kind of cultural sense of that's just what you did. I
Right.
was never raised religion, but I was fascinated by it, and I got into it myself, and got out of it myself, and then back into a different one. But
Yeah.
that's where I found Buddhism originally, and I said, of course, I only had limited access, being 14, and I just found anything I could. And the easiest answer is that I think by the time I was around 17, I just kind of looked back and said, look, I'm meditating, I'm attempting to read the material, I'm listening to talks, I'm doing this and doing that. I guess I'm a Buddhist now.
Mhm.
It just ended up happening.
Mhm.
And of course, I was still pretty naive in that. I kind of fell into the whole notion of secular Buddhism at one point because it was so widely marketed,
Right.
Barn Noble Buddhism, if you will. Um,
Right.
and it made sense to me at the time, but I was very lucky in that I started studying philosophy, and then kind of the more metaphysical ontology became my focus. So I kind of abandoned some of the more materialistic views I had about metaphysics and moved to some other ones, which opened me up. But
Hmm.
long story short with that is that eventually I found a small sangha in my college town, and it was run by someone who knew my teacher and got me connected there. And I signed up for the program. And I'll use the time here to brag a little bit. I was the youngest one ever accepted, but
Oh, nice,
I
nice.
was 17 when I sent it in, and then 18 when actually the start date of training began. But
Mhm.
I say that, but I was very, very lucky. Some people wrote some very, very kind recommendations on my behalf, because normally they don't like to do that. Especially train someone that young, and I wouldn't personally, but hey, I got lucky. Um,
Right, right, right. What are like the unique traits of your specific tradition? Because I don't know much about your tradition.
Sure. I mean, my teacher, Koyoko Bose, who's
Hmm.
since passed on now,
Hmm.
he, was the son of a Shinshu priest. And, he had studied that. He also had studied Zen as well, which is kind of a unique thing. And so had his father, Gyome Kabose.
Hmm.
Gyome, when he founded an independent temple here in the United States, the Temple of Chicago, he founded. And he was one of the first to have a Zendo in a Shinshu temple.
Hmm.
Zen and Shin tend to be kind of marketed or understood as opposites of each other, but he blended them in a very beautiful way of this notion of other power and self power being self power is the true self, which is other power. It was a very beautiful way of going about it.
Hmm.
So I explored more of the Zen side for a while, and I think especially over the pandemic, the Jodo Shinshu side really stuck with me, and I kind of have been very how do you put it? That it's the tradition I found my home in, and I could go on about my particular lineage. It has some interesting stuff, but I mean, I have a tendency to ramble if anyone hasn't picked up on that.
No, it's interesting. It makes it interesting listening, because Buddhism itself is just so. I mean, the amount of the different lineages and the traditions, they're so vast and they're so numerous, right? And they all have
Oh
their
my
own,
goodness.
characteristics or, unique emphasis and practices and teachers and what have you, right? So
Yeah,
I personally find it very interesting, and I also find it it's like what I always find it interesting, like what drew you to that specific like lineage or teacher. So, for example, it said like the Buddha taught 84,000 dharmas for the 84,000 different predispositions and
yeah.
karmic dispositions of people, right? So I always find it interesting to hear like why. So why was somebody drawn to, let's say, like the Thai forest tradition or Theravada in Burma or Zen or Vajrayana or what have you, right?
Yeah, I guess how what I would say for myself is that I was practicing Zen, and I had even found a small Rinzai Zen temple with a real priest there, which is not a common thing to find in the middle of the rural East Coast of America.
Uh-huh.
So I got lucky, and I have nothing bad to say about it. I think Zen is an amazing tradition. Rinzai, I really have some love for.
Yeah.
But it's I guess the easiest way. It's funny to say. It's hard. It's difficult. It's
Right.
incredibly difficult.
Right.
And
Right.
even just trying to do it, I think and I think the pandemic, especially, of just understanding how powerless I was to prevent
Mm.
or do anything. I kind of went crazy during it because of it. Shinshu and Pure Land Buddhism,
Hmm.
this idea of like, look, you just have to let go. And in a way that is saying, look, you are powerless. That's completely true. Your ego will always jump in front of you. The moment you think that I'm, an enlightened Buddha, oh, that might be your ego saying so.
Right.
And I found the kind of humility in that, and especially in the character of Shinran,
Hmm.
who's the founder of Jodo Shinshu,
Hmm.
um, really, really familiar to my own self, and to say, hey, look, it's okay to sit here and say, I don't know. I don't know how to go about this.
Hmm.
I'm not perfect.
Hmm.
And actually, somehow, by constantly admitting that and saying, like, yeah, I'm a bamboo, a foolish being, it's actually easier to practice than it ever was to me. Not having the pressure to say, you've got to achieve Kensho now. This is your one shot.
Right.
This human life is precious. It says, hey, look, just say the name, and the more you can kind of let go of that ego and that striving, the more it actually comes. And that was my experience.
Yeah.
The very humanness of it all to me felt very true.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, that sounds that's great because I feel like people eventually find the tradition that they're meant to be at too, right? It's like and that to be said that each it's not like there's nothing to be learned from other traditions too, right? Like for example, a lot of people they find themselves based in one tradition, but you learn a lot. There's a lot to be learned from Zen or from any other tradition you can encounter. Taking teachings from other traditions and applying those practices can be quite beneficial while having your own base as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's kind of a funny, I don't know, the conclusion I end up coming to because I love Buddhism. I love the different traditions, whether it be Mahayana or Theravada or Vajrayana. I mean, they're fascinating, and there was a struggle I had at one point going, especially in Shinshu, there's this idea of exclusive practice of the reciting the Buddha's name. And I said, well, I love all these other traditions and I want to participate in them when I have the opportunity. Is that going against it? Or, I kind of struggled with that. And then I came to this conclusion that says, look, actually, I realize every time I attempt something that within a different tradition, even if I have some sort of success,
Mhm.
I come to that realization of, look, I don't really have what it takes to go the full way. I
Sure.
don't know if I really feel I have the way to penetrate the Buddha Dharma through meditation or ritual. And somehow that acknowledgement actually has me entrust in the name of the Buddha, the Nembutsu, even
Mm.
more so. So I found that no matter what I do, whatever practice, it all ends up being the Nembutsu at the end for me. And that is to say, for me.
Yeah,
I'm
for
amazed
sure.
by the dedication others have. And I absolutely think that, hey, if you can do it, my God, Godspeed.
Right, right. Maybe you can share with the listeners what is Nembutsu.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, there's so much stuff you throw out there. So the Nembutsu, or the name of the Buddha, is the central practice of all Pure Land Buddhism, which is this idea that a Buddha, a great Buddha named Amitabha or Amida in the Japanese pronunciation, had made a vow. Actually, made 48 vows, but the most important of them in the Shinshu tradition is the 18th, which essentially says, if anybody thinks on my name and says it even one time, they will be reborn in my pure land.
Mm.
This realm outside of samsara, which is kind of like a training school, a graduate school that you can
Mhm.
go and be reborn in and learn directly from a Buddha.
Mhm.
And that is simply the recitation of Namu Amida Butsu.
Mhm.
And again, it is hard to believe. It's somehow both the easiest practice possible, but often said the most difficult because it's hard to believe. Who really would? And
Right.
again, it's just as difficult as any other practice.
Mhm.
Yet it's not.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it's kind of this. I've always said I think Pure Land Buddhism is esoteric because they tell you the secret right out in the open. There's no hidden secret anywhere to it, but the fact that it's so difficult to comprehend, it almost lends this esoteric investigation into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, okay, interesting. Yeah, so that being your main practice, obviously that's so the main practice is the recitation, right? Of
Yeah,
the
and then saying
of the
out loud, Namu
uh,
Amida Butsu.
uh,
Yeah.
uh, and so but also as you mentioned though, you at least your teacher did you also incorporated other practices like Zen and other like that's the foundation, that's the main practice, but there are other other like, I mean, meditation and
Yeah,
um
I mean, I still will do zazen, things like
Zen.
that. I mean, actually, a lot of Zen Shinshu people in the U.S. have started adopting meditation, and some of them will view it not necessarily as the way to enlightenment, but as, for instance, a way to stop that cluttered thoughts, to focus on the name, to do what's called deep listening, listening for the call of the Buddha. So there's always more to it, I think, and any practice, I think, with this kind of entrusting can be nimbutsu. My teacher Koyoko Bose was amazing at this, where he would somehow transform anything into a Buddhist teaching and practice. He had this whole thing about toilet gashos. Every time you sit on the toilet, you become grateful because, my God, imagine if you didn't have it. And everything about gratitude and constantly being aware of that. And I think that's part of that deep listening, deep feeling and listening of the compassion of what the Shinshu and Pure Land people call other power, power beyond the self.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. Are there any major sutras that your tradition focuses on?
Oh, I mean, yeah, they're just each one has a name. The longer
Hmm.
sutra, the shorter sutra, the Amitaya Sutra. They're the
Hmm.
three Pure Land Sutras, is what they're called. That's the easiest way you can find them, and they're actually quite small, all things
Hmm.
considered.
Okay.
Uh,
So they're pretty short overall. So they're it's common to like recite some of the shorter ones, right? As part of a practice too, right?
yeah, that's, I mean, I think pretty classic. One of the ones, at least in our tradition, with the Bright Dawn and where we came from, we often recite what's called the Tambutsuge or the Sanbutsuge, depending on which of the two bigger sects you follow, which is just a smaller passage of a song and praise of the Buddha, which is actually Amitabha Buddha or Amida Buddha, who is the one praising a different Buddha, but this is when they were still a student.
Hmm.
So it's interesting because it's one of those where, while reciting it, you take that spot. You become the reciter, Dharmakara Bodhisattva. Um, Even in our tradition, there was this wonderful quote. Let me see if I can find who said it, but he said, "I find that Amida saves me by becoming me." So there's this again. It's a simple practice, but there's something to it that continuously gets deeper and deeper. There's no
Mm.
secrets, but there's a lot to explore.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned the founder is Shinran, is that correct?
Yeah, founder of Jodo Shinshu, which
Yeah.
was never meant to be its own sect by any means.
Mm.
More so, it was Shinran believed that he was simply promoting the teachings of his teacher, Honen.
Hmm.
But again, he did so much explaining, and he was a very analytical, logical kind of guy, that it's just his. It became known as Jodo Shinshu, or the true sect of Pure Land Buddhism. But I've always hated that translation because it makes it sound like other ones are false. But it's
Yeah.
true in terms of Shinran saying, "This is what I know to be true." He's saying that about himself, and that's it's not a disparaging title for others.
Yeah, right. For sure, for sure. Um, are there any stories like I'm sure you've probably read a bit about Shinran and like his life, his you know, different stories about him. Are there any interesting ones that stuck out or come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, he was a fascinating individual.
Hmm.
I especially the one where, I mean, he studied for 20 some years as a very dedicated monk on Mount Hye, and he just uh, felt himself to be completely inadequate to be able to achieve enlightenment on himself. So he left, and he stayed at a temple in front of a statue of Kannon or Avalokiteshvara, Guan Yin. Had this beautiful dream where Kannon essentially came to him and said, "Look, if you can't keep the monistic codes, I will appear as a woman and marry you. I will sleep with you, essentially, is what she says in the say. It says, if that's what it takes. That kind of became this thing where Shinran married, and partly was because of the Shinshu people that says, hey, look, priests in Japan end up actually being able to have families and marry.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a very, very interesting one that I always found again, compassion even after breaking the what was supposed to be these very, very solemn vows. Yet, of
Mhm.
course, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are infinitely compassionate, and they'll take even a poor bastard like Shinran.
He was a poor bastard, huh?
Oh yeah, I mean he was very a tough life in many regards, but he persevered. I mean, he knew himself. He said something along the lines of, one of my favorite quotes by him was paraphrase. He said, I lack even little good and compassion, and yet I teach for fame and fortune." He lamented on himself that no matter what, he was so not down on himself, but he was critical of his own nature and he was honest. And I said, if I ever have a teaching position, with a dedicated office, I'm gonna get that quote and hang that above my office so no one thinks I'm some holy teacher.
Right. Oh, that's good. That's good. I like that. So, what are your specific like roles in the terms that you said? You mentioned that you were involved in the tradition. What do you teach? Do you have like your song, or do you lead teachings, or do you lead
Uh,
specific practices, or what are your specific roles?
for the most part, I mean, I don't have a temple or a sangha myself here, but I've been working. I'm a once our teacher, Koyo Kobose, had passed away. It was his instructions that he didn't name a Dharma heir. He wanted the organization and that legacy to be continued through a council, and one that was democratically elected of the people he had trained and ordained. And I was very honored to be voted on to the council. So now I'm part of that. I'm working on the curriculum to the educational program because the Bright Dawn is kind of understand it's like a special seminary, if you will.
Mhm.
We do distance learning and the virtual stuff. Often we have people come to the sanctuary, California. But yeah, I'm doing that. I teach during that those training periods, and I'm working hard on trying to revitalize some of the curriculum. Some books have gone out of print. There's better material nowadays, and there's a lot to it. But I tend to teach and do things when I'm kind of called for it. Part of the program and my teacher and his teachers' ideal was, he said, they didn't envision Buddhism in America in every regard, to say that they didn't imagine a temple on every block. They kind of said, look, we need people on the ground who can fill in the niches of their community in whatever way they needed to.
Mhm.
So sometimes we use the term lay minister,
Mhm.
and that's kind of an internal title because people mistake that like a lay pastor, like an untrained, unordained person.
Mhm.
But really, the idea was that we're not above a congregation; we're part of it, and that was always their view. Especially in that kind of Shinshu idea of it, says, "Look, I'm a minister not because I'm special. In fact, I have more of a responsibility to know myself as a foolish being."
Yeah. Okay, I like that. That's good. That's humbling,
So
right?
yeah, I do a lot of interfaith work too. So I try to get into the local community and work with that because I think it's an important thing we need, especially in this day and age.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I feel like especially in America, it almost feels like there's no, I mean, me living here in Asia, there's like a cohesive culture and respect. And, sometimes going back to America is just like, you feel like there is no any sort of cohesion. And it's like everyone's at each other's throats and there's like violence and, just a lack of respect and a lack of compassion um, towards each other, right? So, for example, here in Korea, everybody views themselves as Korean. Obviously, they're part of the same group culture, and there's respect for your fellow Koreans and your country. Whereas in America, it's almost like fuck that other guy. It's this like lack of any sort of like cohesive societal norm or culture or like group, right? Because everyone's just out for everyone's individual and part of a different clan or group. So it is good to, if there can be compassion and the sort of the bodhisattva ideals and teachings, sort of what would you say, taught to people. It doesn't even need to be in like religious terminology, but just general guidelines for behavior. That would be great, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a dream. Where America is at a very interesting and tumultuous place.
Yeah.
That is for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. I always think about like with advancement of AI, right? It's like if what qualities is it going to take on? Is it going to take on the qualities of like the individualistic, liberal, democratic American qualities, or like shall we program the bodhisattva ideals into some sort of this kind of being? Yeah, because if it's like the first one, I feel like we're all screwed, right? Like,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's a very oh boy, it says my internet's unstable. Can you still hear me? Am I
Oh
back
yes,
now?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then there's always that little issue of, you know, unfortunately, these the bodhisattva ideals also need subtlety, which is something that I think AI doesn't really have yet. It's tends to be a very black and white morality when you do have these things put in place.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's hard. I think really that's the big critique I have of most of cultural stuff in America is that there tends to be no nuance or
Right.
you know interest in subtleties.
Mm-hmm.
There tends to be a very yes and no, black and white. Um, Something's wrong or something's right view, and it's that's something that I don't even know. I don't know how we could possibly fix, but we'll keep trying. Sentient beings aren't innumerable. We vow to save them all. Paradoxes are nothing new to Buddhists.
Exactly, exactly. That's for sure. All right. Well, I think we've covered most of the topics that we laid out. But do you have any, final thoughts or suggestions? If there's any links you want me to include in the show notes, I can do that as well.
I can say a final thought on the whole thing tying Buddhism and the UFO alien phenomena together that I think is an interesting connection.
Hmm.
Um, that is one thing that we see with a lot of this is this kind of fear about these beings or intelligences. They're so much more advanced than us. They're so much this or that. What do they want? I think Buddhism has a similar answer to that.
Hmm.
It says, look, they're these things, whatever they are, humans have a special place in this world. Within
Hmm.
the Buddhist world, we are uniquely able to become Buddhas. We
Hmm.
have something that even the Deva, the Asura, these very advanced, powerful beings fear or
Right.
desire. And I think that's the same with a lot of these strange intelligences.
Hmm.
Again, Alan, maybe this is my plug for us, since I do draw so much inspiration. Alan Greenfield in his book, The Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts, or The Complete Secret Cipher, as it's been re-released.
Hmm.
It ends on a light note, and I think I have a little passage here, um, something along the lines of, would I cycle it? He talks about the mythology that we constantly see.
Hmm.
It shows up in some of the literature. The jealous gods of Genesis that have that saw we've gained wisdom from the tree of knowledge. We
Hmm.
might eat the tree of life and thus become gods ourselves. The story of the Titan Prometheus bringing fire from the heavens to humanity, for which the gods punished him in unimaginable ways. Um, the Norse myths of the very mortal gods preparing for cosmic combat against frost giants and their allies. All these stories in ultra terrestrial terms tell us of beings and forces, human or close to human, that have defied and conquered thousands of worlds and repeatedly put the evil to the fight. And again, within Buddhism, we see the same thing. The bodhisattvas were born in the human realms in the Saha world and became Buddhas and Bodhisattvas through that. There's a lot of fear, and I don't think we need to have that fear. Being human's weird. It's scary, and we have a potential for a lot of good. I think that in a world full of huge events and things, it's important to remember we have that potentiality. You know,
Mhm.
go forth, practice whatever good magic hopefully you do.
Mhm.
The Dharma, whatever you have that is positive and good. I think these things fear us more than we need to fear them.
Mhm.
I think in Greenfield's book, they say, uh, like hungry ghosts, they drink our fear, but to drink our love is death unto them and their kin. You
Mhm.
know, which is a badass quote that always stuck with me. So I check out the rest of the book. It's wild and weird, but
Mhm.
and again, I'm at the point where I know I'm rambling on when I start quoting things directly. So
No,
I'm gonna
it's
leave it
good.
at that. But I don't really have much social media or anything yet. I probably should eventually, but who
Mhm.
knows? Maybe one day.
Yeah, for sure. And what was the title of the Greenfield book that you were quoting?
Oh, the complete secret cipher of the Euphonauts. Now, if anyone is interested in the idea between ceremonial and Western magic and occultism, I would recommend that book. And of course, there's a series which most people discover it through called Hellier, which again is one of the most remarkable paranormal, high strangeness Fortean documentaries out there. It's a series. You can find it on YouTube.
Yeah, that was great. I watched Hellier. And
Yeah.
also, he recently released a movie by the title of Unbinding, a documentary.
Yes, the Newkirks, the whole team, amazing documentary too. I'm a big fan, so I'll start nerding out about them if we keep going.
Okay, for sure. Well, that was great. I really enjoyed this podcast. Thanks for coming on, and I'll include links to the book that you had mentioned in the show notes. And until next time.
Until next time, thank you for having me.